Hey everybody, what's going on? It is Tuesday, week 6 of my furlough, and I apologize I wasn't around very much in week 5. Week 5 was a little bit of a rough week for me. Started out okay. I did a stock shoot on Monday and started planning this video that I'm gonna complete today. Started putting that together, but on Monday my mother was admitted into the hospital. She was having some complications. Got there on Monday evening. And then on Wednesday, she actually passed away. So last week was a rough week, a little bit rough. Totally at peace with it. I know where my mom's at. It's all good in that regard. If you've ever lost a loved one, you probably can relate to this. You're kind of dull afterwards is the best way I know to describe it. I just wasn't sharp. I wasn't motivated for the next few days. My wife talks about how it's kind of like being in a haze, and I think that's a good way to describe it as well. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, just kind of dull, just kind of getting through. I had a wonderful Mother's Day with my wife, and I told her by Monday or Tuesday, I need to get back into being productive. And so here we are. Monday, I meant to do a whole bunch of stuff, but unfortunately, what my productive self did yesterday, Monday, was spent 4.5 hours on the phone with unemployment. So hopefully that's getting worked out as well. There's some issues there. Just craziness. But it is week 6 of the furlough. I haven't heard from my job about going back as at this point. So we're going to continue to be productive here in this studio. And we're going to start with this video right here. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is the simple subject of, is stock photography harmful to the photo industry? Now, there is that thought process of selling stock photography hurts the people that are trying to be hired as a photographer. So that's what I want to talk about. And I want to go back a little bit and tell my history in stock photography. I know I've talked about this a little bit before, but when I graduated from college, I very much wanted to be a stock photographer. Now, back then, everybody was shooting film. It was a much different scenario than it is today. You shot film, invested the money in the film and the processing, labeled all of your images, sent them into a stock agency, and there were a handful of them around the world. And then what that stock agency would do, if they accepted you, which it was very difficult to get in back then, because everybody that was doing it was super high end. What they would do is they would then sell your images around the world. But being that they just had a piece of film, it was much more difficult for them to distribute it. So what they did was, they probably had various different ways, but they didn't have the internet to work with. So they would produce these thick catalogs. I wish I had more of them from back then, but they would produce these catalogs, send them out to clients, and then clients would buy the images. They would have to send out the sheet of film, the client would do what they needed to do with it, and then send the film back, and then they could sell it again. So it was a much slower process than what's happening today, and therefore the payout or the royalties from those images were much, much higher. They weren't undercutting the people who were out being hired for the job near like it's happening today. One of the places that did this was a place called Tony Stone Worldwide, and my goal was always to get in with Tony Stone. I believe they were headquartered in Chicago, but had offices all over the world. And Tony Stone was what I would consider probably one of the higher end stock agencies, and I tried to send images into them, get accepted, and I never got accepted. And one of the problems I think I had back then was I was a lot of my work was scenic photography. I lived in Colorado, I hiked a lot and took a lot of mountains and trees and stuff. And the problem with that is a lot of people did that. So the competition was enormous. Over time, I stopped sending into the agencies. I did get into an agency that was a smaller agency in Colorado. But over time, I got so busy with other work, shooting weddings and commercial work, and I moved to Ohio and started teaching and all these things, and I just kind of let the stock thing kind of drop, because not only was it tough to get into some of the bigger agencies, it was a lot of money. You were spending the money on the film, processing, the time to label everything, to mail them off. And it just kind of went by the wayside for me. And then along comes microstock, the digital age and the internet. And I was not super excited about it at first because the initial thought process of that was you were going to make 25 cents on an image. And my thought was, why would I give away my images for 25 cents? And I specifically remember having a student come into my classroom. It was a first-year student, maybe even like a first quarter student. I mean, brand new student. And I remember him coming in saying to me how excited he was because he had just sold one of his photographs on one of these stock sites. And I asked him, how much did you make? And he said, well, I think I made 13 cents. And I remember, really bursting his bubble saying, do you realize what you just did? You just gave away your artwork for 13 cents. And so at the time I thought that, it's crazy to do that. You are hurting the industry. A few years went past and I happened somewhere online, probably read an article where they were interviewing Tony Stone, who was no longer in the stock industry, I believe, but he was the guy that ran that agency in the film days that I always wanted to get into. And as I'm reading his interview, they ask him about microstock, and I'm going to paraphrase, back in the film era, we could sell one image in a year for $500. Now you can sell that same image for $1 1,000 times a year. And he really put it into perspective for me in a way that made me think maybe I should start embracing it. And that's when I got into stock photography again, the microstock digital end of things, and got excited about it. Now, the reality, I think, when microstock first took off and professional photographers didn't embrace it, but all the wannabe photographers did embrace it. I'm being general there, so don't quote me on that completely. But if you were just kind of a hobbyist and you thought, oh, I'm going to do microstock, and you had success in it, all the established professional photographers are shunning it because they didn't want to sell their images for so cheap. My hope at the time when I first started getting into it was hoping that the more professional photographers got into it, that the quality of the images would start going up and we would drive out the wannabe photographers, if that makes sense. So that was always kind of my game plan as far as a professional, that I was going to jump into the microstock world, but I was going to produce the highest quality images I could and just help the industry in that way. I'm not sure that has actually happened because the farther we go into this digital age, an iPhone does amazing images, and a lot of advertisers or a lot of companies may just say, I'll just take my own pictures with my iPhone. I mean, they're just only going to Instagram anyway, so what's the big deal? So I don't know how that has worked out for sure as far as the quality going up. I don't know. We live in the age that we live, and, companies are content with iPhone images in a lot of cases. And unfortunately, the world is not going to change for us because we're professional photographers complaining about the quality. So as far as stock photography is concerned, if you think it's hurting the industry and you have a personal conviction that you don't want to be part of that, then I certainly think you have the freedom not to be a part of it. But also be aware that the world is going to move on with or without you, and stock photography is obviously here to stay. I don't really think it's hurting the industry. It's just, things are kind of developing as we go, and you can choose where you want to be a part of it. So that's my 2 cents on that, kind of how I developed over the years and my thinking with it. I love it. I think it's a fantastic way to motivate yourself. You can, if you're ever thinking there's not a lot of photography work to be had, or at least I'm having a hard time finding it, well, stock photography is a perfect way for you to generate your own work, create your own stuff every single day. Okay, and while I'm on the subject of stock photography, one last little thing before I go, and that is, where do all my photos that sell get used? Because if you're anything like me, the fact that it sold is fantastic. The fact that they're going to send you some money, wonderful. But I'm really curious where these images are getting purchased or where they're being used. Now, I think it's kind of hard to find that, especially if it goes to print somewhere, especially if it goes to print somewhere on the other side of the world. How am I ever going to see it? But if you go online, if you go to Google Images, upload your photo, and Google will search it for you. Now, you will find a lot of the results are simply the stock agencies, because I think what's happening is Google is just going through there and finding your picture. And of course, your picture is on the stock agency for sale. So a lot of them will be stock links. But every once in a while, you'll find where it's being used, and sometimes it's an exciting place. Sometimes it's just on somebody's blog. Sometimes they've altered it in Photoshop and done something exciting with it. Yeah, it's kind of a neat way to look up where your images are being used and how they look online. And for me, if nothing else, it's a motivation to keep pushing and produce more work. Certainly, it's kind of an indicator as to what is selling. So that's a good way to plan new shoots. So I've got to get shooting. I've got a couple of shoots I want to do this week. Got to be productive and get back on track. Get rid of that dullness that's kind of hanging around and get sharp again. And I appreciate you guys so much. We're up to 70 subscribers. That means a lot. I know we got a long ways to go to get to that 1,000 that I talked about. Every subscriber counts, and I thank every single one of you for watching. Leave me a comment, share it, tell everybody else to subscribe, and I will see you later this week. Have a great day. Bye, guys.
My best friend didn't care about the rules, good on the weekends. I'll be in fools, drifting to deep space. So brave and so stupid, just like the movies.